I want to start today by asking you to participate in a psychological experiment. It is a challenge that might make you feel uncomfortable, but I promise it will change the way you see the world. Here's the task. When you leave this room today, or perhaps tomorrow morning when you step out into the sunlight, I want you to look for a stranger. It could be someone sitting on a park bench, someone standing in line at the grocery store, or someone riding the bus next to you. I want you to walk up to that person, look them in the eye, and ask them one specific question. The question is, when was the last time you cried in front of someone? And then, once they answer, I want you to answer the same question yourself. Now, be honest with me. How does that make you feel? Just hearing those instructions probably sends a shiver down your spine. You might feel a knot in your stomach. If I asked for a show of hands of who was excited to do this, I bet no hands would go up. That reaction is completely normal. In fact, it is the most human reaction possible. We are wired to avoid awkwardness. The idea of approaching a complete stranger and asking them about their most vulnerable, private moment feels terrifying. It feels like a social violation. We think, they will think I am crazy, or they will get angry, or it will be incredibly painful. But I am here to tell you that despite your fear, this experiment is the key to unlocking a superpower. If you can understand why this question works, you can master the art of communication. You can become what we call a supercommunicator. To explain why this matters so much, I have to take you back in time and tell you a personal story. It is a story about my own failures. A few years ago, I found myself in a terrible cycle with my wife. We have been married for over 20 years, and we love each other deeply, but we kept having the same argument over and over again. It would always start the same way. I would come home from a long, grueling day at work. At the time, I was working as a reporter for the New York Times. It was a high-pressure job. I was dealing with difficult editors, impossible deadlines, and office politics. By the time I walked through my front door, I was exhausted. I was carrying a heavy, emotional backpack. I would sit down at the dinner table and just start venting. I would say, "You won't believe what happened today. My boss is being impossible. I feel like nobody appreciates the work I am doing. I'm drowning in assignments." I was looking for comfort. I was looking for a safe harbor. But my wife, who was a brilliant and logical person, saw my pain and wanted to fix it. She would listen for a minute and then say, "Well, why don't you just take your boss out to lunch? If you guys talk face to face, you can build a better relationship, and he will understand your workload." Now, if you look at that advice objectively, it is fantastic advice. It is actionable, it is smart, and it would probably solve the problem. But in that moment, I didn't want a solution. When she offered me that advice, I didn't feel relieved, I felt angry. My blood pressure would rise. I would look at her and say, "I don't want to take him to lunch. That's not the point. Why aren't you on my side? You should be outraged for me." And then the dynamic would shift. My wife would get offended. She would think, "I am trying to help you. I am giving you a solution to your misery, and you are attacking me for it." She would withdraw, feeling unappreciated for her advice. I would withdraw, feeling unheard in my pain. We would end the evening in silence, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, watching TV but not really seeing it. It was lonely, and I knew I had to fix it. Because I'm a journalist, I decided to treat this problem like a story. I needed to investigate. I went out and started interviewing experts, neurologists, psychologists, and sociologists who study human communication. I asked them simply, "Why can't I talk to my wife? Why do we keep missing each other?" The researchers told me something that blew my mind. They said, "Charles, you are making a fundamental mistake that almost everyone makes. You think you're having one discussion, but you're actually navigating 3 different layers of conversation at once." They explained that we are living in a golden age of communication science. We can now use MRI machines to see which parts of the brain light up during a conversation. And the data shows that every single discussion we have falls into one of 3 specific buckets. If you don't know which bucket you're in, you're destined to fail. Let's break down these 3 buckets because understanding them is the secret to connecting with anyone. The first bucket is the practical conversation. This is the "what is this really about" conversation. This is when we are analyzing data, making plans, or solving problems.
If you are negotiating a salary, fixing a broken car, or deciding where to go for vacation, you're in the practical bucket. It is logical, linear, and solution-oriented. The second bucket is the emotional conversation. This is the how do we feel conversation. This is entirely different. In this bucket, facts matter less than feelings. When I am in this bucket, I don't want you to fix my problem. I want you to empathize. I want you to say, I hear you, and that sounds really hard. I want validation, not a roadmap. The third bucket is the social conversation. This is the who are we conversation. This is about our identity and how we relate to the people around us. This is the conversation you have when you meet a neighbor or when you talk to your boss versus your friend. It establishes our social standing and our tribe. Here's the crucial insight the researchers gave me, the matching principle. They said, successful communication only happens when both people are in the same bucket at the same time. If I am speaking the language of emotion and you are speaking the language of practicality, we will just talk past each other. This was exactly what was happening with my wife. I was screaming for an emotional conversation, asking to be hugged, and she was offering a practical conversation, telling me how to fix it. We were mismatched, and because we were mismatched, we couldn't hear each other. This principle is so powerful that it is now being taught in schools across the country. Teachers are learning that when a child comes to them, maybe a child is crying or acting out or looking stressed, the teacher shouldn't just guess what the child needs. The teacher should explicitly ask. They're taught to ask, do you want to be helped? Do you want to be hugged? Or do you want to be heard? Think about how brilliant that is. Helped means the practical bucket. Hugged means the emotional bucket. Heard means the social bucket. When a child identifies what they need, the teacher can match them, and suddenly the conflict disappears. The child feels understood, and the teacher knows exactly what role to play. But let's be real for a second. We are adults. We can't always walk around the office or a dinner party asking, do you want a hug right now? If you try that in a corporate boardroom, you might get a visit from human resources. It's a little too direct for most adult interactions. So we need a more subtle tool. We need a way to figure out which bucket someone is in without making things weird. This brings us to the concept of deep questions. A deep question is a specific type of inquiry that bypasses the superficial layers of conversation and goes straight to the core. A shallow question asks about facts. A deep question asks about values, beliefs, and experiences. It invites the other person to show you who they really are. Let me give you some examples of how to transform a boring question into a deep one. Instead of asking someone, where do you work, which is just a fact, try asking, what is the best part of your job? Or what do you find most challenging about your work? Do you see the difference? The first question gets you a one-word answer. I'm an accountant. The second question gets you a story. It gets you, well, I love the clarity of numbers, but I hate the stress of tax season. Instead of asking, where did you go to high school, ask, what was high school like for you? Did you enjoy it, or was it a struggle? When we ask these kinds of questions, we are inviting vulnerability, and vulnerability is the currency of connection. When someone shares a feeling and you receive it without judgment, a bond is formed. To truly illustrate the life-changing power of this approach, I want to tell you the story of Dr. Bear Adai. Dr. Adai is a highly respected cancer surgeon in New York City. He specializes in prostate cancer. Now, being a cancer surgeon is incredibly difficult, but Dr. Adai faced a unique problem. You see, prostate cancer is tricky. The prostate is located right next to the nerves that control bladder function and sexual function. Surgery is risky. It can leave a man incontinent or impotent. Furthermore, most prostate cancers are extremely slow-growing. They are not like other aggressive cancers. There is a famous saying in medicine, most men die with prostate cancer, not of prostate cancer. Meaning, if you're an older man, something else will likely take you before the tumor does. So, Dr. Adai would sit these patients down and give them the best, most scientific advice possible. He would say, listen, the data shows that surgery is too risky for you right now. The tumor is small. We should do active surveillance. We'll monitor it closely, but we shouldn't cut you open. He was speaking from the practical bucket. He was using logic, statistics, and medical expertise. The patients would nod, say thank you, and leave. But then a strange phenomenon would happen. They would go home, talk to their terrified wives or husbands, lose sleep all night, and come back the next morning completely changed. They would demand the surgery. They would say, "I don't care about the risks. Get this thing out of me." Dr. Adai was baffled. He felt like a failure. He thought, why are they choosing a dangerous surgery over a safe plan? Why aren't they listening to me? He realized that being a good doctor wasn't just about knowing medicine, it was about communication. So he went to experts at Harvard Business School to learn what he was doing wrong. The experts told him, "Doctor, you are mismatching. The patient comes in terrified. That is an emotional state. You are meeting them with statistics. That is a practical state. You are not connecting." They told him to stop